The opportunity today is to spend a little bit of time talking about this thing we call traceability, and it's a little ironic. My cell phone goes off this morning, and it's my friends at CFIA who have yet another new frequently asked questions out around traceability, and it's actually excellent. It's a huge opportunity to come back in and look at, am I affected? Do I have to do this? Where do I fit into the industry? If I fit in the industry, what part of traceability do I have to pay attention to? So I have to acknowledge that it is a tremendous source of opportunity for us and a source of information that really lets us come back and understand this process. So when we think about traceability, fundamentally it comes back to that conversation of, can we verify where our food product has been from the start all the way through the process? Do we know what's touched it? Do we know what else comes into that realm of that food product? And really what we're trying to do is connect those dots. So when it leaves our farm facilities, right, we have that deep knowledge and ability to move it forward. Now, I know sitting there from the farm perspective, we're saying, wow, it's a whole lot harder than you just said. That there's a whole lot more to it than we've just talked about on the way through. And that's part of the discussion. When we talk about the one up, one back, really all we're saying is, when we see a food product, can we look at where it's come from with some assurance? And can we look forward to where it's going and understand where it's next been passed in the chain? So when we get into that conversation of how do we define that food product, is it by the apple? Is it by the container? Is it by the grouping of products that we have in front of us? It really depends on that starting point. But fundamentally, I would say, is every container that leads the farm needs identification, the ability to reach out and really understand that product, where it's come from, where it's going to. We'll spend some more time on the lot conversation. And I just wanted to flag, if you go to the great authority Google and you look at traceability, I got 23,000 hits yesterday, right? There's a tremendous amount of information there. Our challenge is really trying to weed through some of it. And that's what we'll try and work through a little bit today. I always like the conversation on farm that says, why the heck are we doing this? Right? Fundamentally, what does this really matter? And what is it we're really trying to get to as we go through this process? So I start a little bit with the conversation, and you're all aware of it. The idea of truth in food. When you're in a grocery store, you want to be able to look at that product and understand, is it really what it's being advertised as? Am I getting what I'm out to buy? Right? And a lot of this, in my mind, comes back to that sort of fundamental place where consumers are being incredibly more educated and influenced by things like social media. On farm, we've got a little bit of a responsibility, of a challenge, and of an accountability around us to be able to meet that challenge, to be able to explain where that product is, to be able to share the pride, quite frankly, in how it was produced and the way we've done it and the way it's come together to put the best product in the store that's possible. And to me, I keep that in mind all the time. We'll talk about food safety. We'll talk about the numbers of impacts and sick people. We'll talk about those conversations. But to me, fundamentally, this is about how do we share the pride in agriculture best? And that's the opportunity that traceability really lets us drive out. If the consumers are asking for it, I'm going to tell you openly, the customers, our customers, those retailers that we sell to, they're the ones that are saying, thou shalt, right? And we know how this works. Government has some parameters. Is CFIA actually on this call, Elsie? I'm going to be in trouble. We know how government works. Government looks to understand where the opportunities are around protection and risk management and move them forward. But it's industry that adopts them. It's industry that makes them happen. And in things like the Produce Traceability Initiative, the industry's gotten together and said, we're going to do better, right? We don't need government into that level of detail. We can prove and demonstrate that we got this. We have the ability to back up and follow our product back and through. So when I say who wants it, and we talk a little bit about government as being one of those components, government's providing the framework for us. Fundamentally, this is really driven back by what our consumer is asking for. And I emphasize that because to me, when we look at things like traceability, we're so much further ahead. If from the farm up, we're talking about commitment to getting this right, because it's the right thing for us to be doing. It's that communication of the right information as opposed to the compliance side of what the regulations have told us. And they're there. Right? Be they Safe Food for Canadians regulations or FSMA regulations coming out of the US. Advanced traceability is in both of those pieces. Right? There is a compliance challenge, but realistically to me, this is about the commitment to get it right and to have that product out there. So when we think about that, there's always the component that says, how do we manage risk of recall? In 2016, Canada and the US, roughly about 750 recalls. 750. Over half of them cost more than $10 million. Over almost a quarter of them were $30 million cost recalls. And a lot of what we look to in trying to build things around traceability is to try and shrink that process down. I'm going to be really unpopular here for a second, because recalls are going to happen, and we're going to find things like microbes and products in our material. We farm. We produce products in the dirt. We produce products from the earth. And that means we will see some of those things happening. What traceability starts letting us do is talk about, are we into a public recall where the product's out on the shelf and we're having to pull it back and the news is involved? Or are we into withdrawals where we've recognized a product challenge, we've been able to draw it back before it's even exposed to the consumer? Right? Those are the things that are going to help us reduce this cost and reduce this challenge. Those are the things that are going to help us be, in my opinion, responsible. I talk about the dollars, and we recognize that dollars are one of those, but realistically, it's the trust in our consumers that we're really talking about. Right? The dollars, we can work through that challenge, but when you get a product that comes in, and you all know we're going through lettuce that's just coming out of the US. Right? The flag in saying it's over. E. coli is over. It's not coming out of the US anymore. That challenge is solved. But what are consumers hearing when they hear that? Right now, is that the first time we've been around that one? Right? And it's not just, and I'm going to put this openly, it's not just your farm that will be affected, or the product, or a blueberry, or a lettuce plant. It's the whole industry that gets drawn into this in a major way. So the more we can do from that perspective of prevention, and then understanding our ability to track that product through the value chain, the further we're ahead by a long, long shot. To me, that trust conversation is critical. We talk from industry, and I sit on CPMA as well, the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, and our group works there frequently around conversations of this is about being able to stand up and be proud about our product, to understand the things that we're doing and we're putting into this process, and you bet being willing to have that conversation with those who want to criticize. Because we know the goodness built into the value chain, and we're able to trace it all the way through. So it's not only money, it's about that trust piece. It's also about market access. Because those big retailers have a conversation with us, and they say, not only will you have food safety, you will be able to trace your product from start to end, and you've followed it. You've looked in, right? If you're growers that we work with as a company, we've come back to you and said, that third-party audit you had, right? Let's talk about the corrective action, the things that we need to improve around that process, and making sure, again, we can equate that with the product on the shelf. We can make that connection. We know where those pieces are. We work, frankly, to try and keep government a little less out of it. If the industry's got it, if we've got it nailed, if we understand this process from start to finish, and we've got the ability to prove it, right, then government doesn't have to wade in. And why do we think industry's got a chance on this? Because we know how to do it. You know your farms. You know your farms better than anyone, right? If it's that conversation of someone dropping in and saying, you need to divide by 10 units, and you're going to do it from north to south and from east to west, and you're going to divide, and it doesn't make sense on your farm, why are we forcing that process? So this is the opportunity for us as producers, quite frankly, to get that part right, to do what's making sense in our facilities to be able to provide that clarity of traceability and that ability to follow it through. Those are really where those challenges come back to. On the industry standpoint, this is more than, I'm going to be open, way more than just food safety. Right? This is also about our quality management, our ability to understand where our quality points are, where the touch points are in making it better or worse, and how we can really dig back into that and be able to correct those things. Back to that pride of our product on the shelf. That's where the opportunity comes back to. And supply chain efficiencies are a big part of that component, right? I'm going to say this openly. I've been in a production role as well. I've been on farm. I've worked on farm. I've been a part of that. And I still sell hay out my back 40, right? And fundamentally, that supply chain efficiency, I hate it when I'm paying other people, right? When they take a bigger portion of the pie than what I've supplied and what ends up right on the ground or in front of the animal that's actually being fed. Right? To me, being able to increase supply chain efficiently means more back to the production side, more back to support what we've put in the ground and what we've grown from there. So to me, those are all components that really come back in. Oh, and yeah, there's the little thing about foodborne illness, right? There's that little piece about, we really don't want to make people sick, and we really don't want to contribute to that problem, and we really don't want to be a part of, and you don't want to be caught in that chain ever of going down where we've done that, right? And then there's the compliance piece. And I really do set those as priorities so compliance comes down to the bottom, right? Because if our commitment to the right things are going right, we're there, right? There's good information. There's good pieces to be able to build for. There's good opportunity to reach out and pull more pieces out of it. And here's part of that opportunity. So what are the drivers? What's really the big player in this game? And honestly, I think realistically, it's the retailer. It's the big guys. It's organizations, frankly, like Walmart, like Costco, like Loblaws, like Save-On. Those are organizations that really drive the conversation out. And I'll tell you openly, we can't sell them. We can't sell your product to them if we're not getting this right. Right? And they test us. We go in and we dive into that conversation and try and understand where product has come from and can we really build it through? Can we demonstrate we're doing what we want? Right? And you can use whatever words you want about it being consumer driven. In the end, it's the retailer that's the face that begins to drive that. So we talk a little bit about some of the tools available, and some of the speakers coming up will spend more time on some of these components and where those opportunities lie. I flag Produce Traceability Initiative because it's not new, right? PTI has been around since 2012, 2013, where yes, the industry responded to a crisis, a major crisis, a major food safety challenge. And together we agreed we got to get better at this stuff to be able to move it forward. That's a partnership of industry. Canadian Produce Marketing Association, Produce Marketing Association, United Fresh looked at how we work on trust, how we build trust in our product, how we build trust in our farm products, our product on the shelf again, and create that opportunity. We refer to it because it's a cookbook. Right? GTIN numbers, is everyone familiar with GTIN numbers? Have you tried to make GTIN numbers yourself? This is yes, this is no. Right? GTIN numbers are one of those tools that allow us the kind of connectivity of information, that allow us to go from step to step to step as a way of getting that information out. It's one of the pieces that's out there, and there's a number of tools that we can add in to be able to make that traceability come together. But on farm, let's talk a little bit on how we separate things out. What are the things that could make up a lot as we begin to think our way through this? First of all, it's identifying the premise, right? You've all been through the process of Safe Food for Canadian reg licenses now, right? If you're producing, you will be. That's part of the basis. That's part of the Safe Food for Canadians regs that are in front of us. And what it does is it lets us assure that product is coming from that facility, from that place. And that's the first place. If you don't know where it's come from, from there everything gets cloudy. It can be time specific. And what I mean by that is traceability can start building on what happens on a given day. Be that a harvest day that we're working back from, right? We've seen lot numbers, for example, that attach to when the crop was seeded, right? And the lot idea is, in the end, what's that group of product that's all treated the same? Or that's all has the similar exposure or the similar contact? Comes back to, is it all the same? Is it everything on this table fit within the lot? And that could be when it was seeded. That could be how it was treated. That could be when it was processed or when it was harvested. Those all end up as components that we can think about. We've worked with some growers, for example, that want to look at it by planting date and recognize that for them, planting date actually works its way through, because the planting date affects their harvest time. The planting date affects how they're applying ag chemicals and how they're managing that plot of production, right? Their planting date, in their case, ended up being the most cohesive place we'd come back to. And really, what are we trying to do with this? We're trying to say that there was a challenge out here, be it quality, be it safety, there was a challenge out here in my product. When I start coming back to understand where it might occur, right, by coming back, in their case, to planting date, it provided them an idea that it probably originated in this area, treated the same way, packaged the same way, processed the same way, and shipped the same way. Right? So all we're trying to do is get to that commonality. Does that make sense? Yeah, I mean, the one thing about this more and more is it kind of is common sense. I mean, you can add lots of gobbledygook on it, but it's common sense in the end. And that's really what we're trying to drive out. Variety, for example, location, right? Is it field 6 in the northwest quarter, and that gives me that separation? Those are all tools we've got. Those are all ways of approaching it. Is it this greenhouse? Is it that area? Those are all kind of some of the tools. Harvest crew as well, right? Because we're getting down to that, how are things all touched by the same process, right? So for some of our suppliers, you're going to love us, we go all the way down to harvest crew audits. Are the harvest crews doing the things that they're supposed to do in the time that they're supposed to do them in the way that it's supposed to be done? Right? And we actually go down into the harvest crew audits and have those conversations. So as you think about separating product lot out on the farm, those are all of the opportunities and pieces to pull together. Okay, so those represent that ability to clump. And again, to me, if you're looking at the Google capacity and looking at at what information pieces that are there, it really has to come down to your farm for it to be able to work. You're on farm. How many of you are not walking around every day with a little notebook, kind of continuing to add things into it for your records? Right? Tell me that's not the way we still do some of this, or is it all cell phone now? Right? Or tablet? Yes, it is. Yes, I'm saying, no, we don't touch those anymore. My point is that on farm at all levels, right, it's the record keeping. It's making sure those notes follow you through and that you're able to keep that information, whether it be on paper, whether it be on computer, whether it be advanced and dropped up on the cloud and managed appropriately. It's about being able to keep those and continue to have them go forward, right? When you've started your lot conversation, and this one's a critical one, what are the other items that you need to think about lot code or lot process around? What else touches your food? Right? What are the components that come there? Packaging, the containers that you use to move product off your farm is a really core one. Okay, packaging more all the time is one of those areas of accountability or areas of responsibility that we really want to start paying attention to. And then you all know, you've been through the good ag practices. You've got your ag chemical conversations. You're understanding the inputs. You're understanding the components of those crops. But we do see packaging as one of those that we forget from time to time, right? And here's the gobbledygook opportunity. The definitions of lot by CFIA, right? Fresh off the Safe Food for Canadians regs websites. Those are opportunities, and I'm just trying to emphasize that. Don't look at this from the standpoint of, how can it not apply to me, right? I don't see my specific situation in here, so I don't have to do it. The reality is in the end, we need to build that traceability. We need to build that connectivity. We need to understand how it goes. So these are just the conversations that come back and give us some examples, some ideas. Production date, best before date, establishment number, Safe Food for Canadians regs license. Those are all of the components that we need to have in process at each container leaving your farm, right? At each container that you sell into leaving the farm. That to me is the easiest way to come back to it, right? From the harvest standpoint, when we're in that harvest packing, and I'm picking on spaces and things that we've seen over the last couple of years where we've struggled to make sure we've got that information together. If you're doing on-farm packing, right, that's a critical piece. If you're going to a packer, ensuring that your information going into the packer is seamless and able to move back and forth, right? So the item, what are we selling? Right, down to the variety or down to the level of detail that you want in terms of your product, but coming down to that level of piece. Farm location, right? Where's my premise? Where does the SFCR attach to? The field, if we're starting to build a bit more resolution, narrowing that down. Harvest dates, harvest crews, who was there? And I'm going to come back to that conversation. Packing house, if used, where those opportunities are. Packing date, if different than harvest date. Understanding how long it's been sitting in the cooler before we get to packing. Really good information, right? And the crew, it's packing crew, if different than the harvest crew. Do you see that what we're really trying to do is just connect the touches? Just really connect where that product has been to be able to identify all the product that's been treated the same way. This is the on-farm stuff. And I'm always impressed because so often on-farm, we start in the conversation and we've had too many of them late saying, so where are you at with traceability? And I love this conversation. Don't do it. Okay, let's have a look at what production is. Let's have a look at what's going on, what's there. And when you talk to them about, so when was that fertilized? Oh, where's my book? Where's my computer? Right? Here's the date, there's the time, this is what I applied, this was the tractor it went on with, this is the volume of water associated with it. You're doing traceability. Right? So much of this information are things that we've already got tucked into our back pockets. But things that we don't see, and staff is a wonderful one. This one emerged just this morning because I'm looking at another hepatitis A announcement. Right? These 5 workers diagnosed with Hep A, on the line, doing these kinds of things, right? Traceability lets me look real quick at where were those workers, what days were they on, what lots were they associated with, here's the product that's at risk, right? So those conversations start coming in, particularly when China's woo-woo fever is coming upon us, and it is not foodborne, relax, let's be clear, right? It is not foodborne, so that's not something, but Hep A absolutely is, for example. Right, so there are parameters that are associated with staff that we need to be able to reach back and touch. Can you do that on your operations now? Have you got employee ID that lets you go back to the lot production or the product that you've produced? Right, that's one that we've seen as some interesting conversations around. Packaging lot, right? And this one always shows up when we're changing packaging. Or when you're going from a punnet to a top seal, or you're going from one packaging year to another packaging year, are we able to reach back? And I'll use the example openly. We received product recently coming into our fresh cut facility that had, as we started to denest them, that had shards of plastic. Right? And it just comes from the punnet. It comes from the bowl being cut and the edges falling in and there being plastic associated with it. Is that a risk? What do you think? Are shards of plastic a risk in your food? Right? How many people want their fruit salad to include plastic? No. Right? It's a fundamental piece. So being able and needing to look at this, go back to the full lot that was purchased, do a bit of sampling across it and say, this whole lot is not something that I'm going to be able to put food in. Right? And being able to reach back into that conversation, know what product had been applied to it, know which lots were associated with the process, and be able to pull that information back. And that was a great one, right? Those are the opportunities, because before it's actually in retail, we got it. Right? So now it can come back from warehouses, it can come back from coolers, and consumer trust is retained. How do you think that would work if, 4 neighbors are sitting around and, gee, I had that fruit salad, but I got a toothpick in it. It's really good. It helps me clean my teeth, right? And all 4 have the same conversation. How long do you think that would take to be out there? Yeah, not long at all, unfortunately, right? The bin lot, I love the stone fruit work that's going on. Our challenge, bin by bin by bin. Right? Do we know, if we look at that bin, can we reach back to where was it picked up, who delivered it, who's brought it here, what temperature was it kept at, those components that are about sort of how that was treated together. Harvest lot, this is the easiest one that comes up, right? Here's the harvest lot, here's the product that was harvested. I can go back to where it came from, who did it, what ag chemicals have touched it, what inputs are associated with it. I can go forward to who I brought it to. Oh, which truck did I load it on? And did that go to that packer or that packer? And, were those actually harvested the same day? Or, it was a warm day. We held off. We went to the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And did we irrigate at that time point? Because if we irrigated, what do we have in our water source? Right? You seeing the pieces? Right? Those are the challenges that keep coming forward, right? Inputs, receivables, think about them. When you receive a product, when you receive packaging, do you record it? Do you have the lot number associated with it? Do you know where it's come from, right? What about your sanitation chemicals that you use to touch every part of your food contact surfaces? Do we have that information, right? The receivables that are coming in are all part of that trusty notebook of keeping that information, of keeping those together so that when we're talking to the lawyer, right, we can give him information that he can work from, right? Or we have at least a consistency of process and the ability to do that. On the production lot, do we know what equipment was used? What people were associated with it, right? Do we know the amounts that went through so we can track back a little bit, knowing we took 20 bins out of the orchard and we only used 18 of them today? What does that mean? Where are the other 2? How do we connect them through? How do we connect that traceability moving forward? Right? Oh, and did I say, can we get that together in 4 hours? Can we get it together in 4 hours? When the question comes out, can we reach into our information, right? For those of us that only use 1 book, it's really good, right? But when it's 27 books or 27 pieces of paper on 3 locations, now we have a problem, right? Your computer just went down. Where's it backed up? STAR requirements. So this is when we can bring it down to real life, quite frankly, from our perspective. And why? Because we want to sell to the best retailers. We want to be able to go into the best price markets we can actually access, right? And we can only do that with this level of conversation, with this level of assurance that comes through. Fundamentally, we need premise ID, product ID, and movement ID. Right? And that's really, I like breaking things down to 3s because sometimes those are the only fingers that work. That's really where it comes down to. If anything I'm putting through, I can relate to the premise, the product itself, and the movement of where it's been, we're 9/10 there. Right? Really simply, that's what it comes down to. Openly, we add some pieces. Preventative control plan, HACCP control plan, and yes, this is about traceability. All of these have traceability components to them. Fundamentally, do we have it in place and are we moving it forward? Have you conducted a mock recall? What's a mock recall? Right? It's pretending. I'll spend a little bit of time on that. I will spend a little bit of time on that just to touch on and really kind of drive it out. Right? But it's being able to demonstrate that's kind of like divine intervention after a while. It's telling me that it's time to get a buzz on. Do we have the labeling requirements and do we understand them? A little bit of a heads up, if you're doing consumer pre-packs at all, if you're doing apples in bags, if you're doing anything in a container that the producer will take, right? As of 2020, CFIA says we will have lot code or unique identifier on each bag or container, on each one. Now, we argued back quite a bit, and what that got us to is to 2021 now, so we can use up packaging, right? So the industry can use packaging that's in place and be able to get ourselves through. But by January 2021, if you put a bag in a box, right, that bag needs a label on it. And the label needs to have core information, right? And I'll tell you openly, we've already got retailers that are pushing back and saying, well, they really say 2020, so you should have it today, right? Basic product coming through, basic simplicity, we need that piece that's in place. And we go to what we call the supplier approval program. What does that let us do? It lets us come down and be on farm. Lets us come down and be in facility and go through the conversations and be a partner in this stuff, right? Work together to kind of get us to where we need to be and provide that opportunity to really build there, right? Mock recall. To me, this is one of the really core pieces for traceability. This is where you get to play for a bit, right? So in your imagination, what was the trigger event? What was the problem that set us off? How do we get there, right? This openly should be second nature. We want to go to the right. What's the health risk assessment? And we've got presentation coming up that's going to help us spend time around that area, right? But that's part of your mock recall. How big an issue is it? What kind of impact? What's the likelihood of occurring? Are we going through that process of really understanding how this is going to touch our consumers? Right? Think about it as if you were that consumer in that process. From there, we go into the decision-making, the recall decision-making process. Is it a recall or withdrawal? Are you going to talk about the difference between those? No? A little bit? Perfect. Okay? So it's the separating those out to minimize your risk and exposure, to minimize the impact that's potential coming through. From there, you do it. You set that recall out, right? And frankly, as one of the buyers, we get that lots of time. We have all kinds of emails that come through, mock recall, right? We're following the process. Our suppliers are following the process. Our retailers are following the process. Here's the important piece. Evaluate how effective you were in the recall. How much did you actually account for? Right? I always like this one. We have a group that we work with who declare openly 121%. Okay, so you actually found more than you produced in the first place. That's interesting. Where's that coming from? No, it's 121% every time. Let's make it real. Right? Let's provide the opportunity to really kind of dig into this. Corrective action, what worked for us? Right? What do we need to correct immediately? And what's the root cause process? Why did we stumble? How do we make sure we don't stumble again? This should be second nature, right? Food safety teams we work with, frankly, this is their weekly conversation, right? If I'd done it on this product, here's the problem. And if you think backwards a little bit, when you're walking your facility, when you're in looking at your production lines and you go, uh-oh, right? That's one that I hope we don't get a recall on, or I hope I don't have to trace. Those are the ones to try in the repacks. Those are the ones to try and really work your way through. So it's the opportunity to get better on each and every process. So by conclusion, and we're going to get there, I promise. Okay? Traceability's here. Don't make the mistake of thinking we can get away from this. It's embedded in Safe Food for Canadians regs. It's embedded in FSMA. As an industry, it's here. Right? We need to move forward. We need to build our way, understand what the ask is, pay a little bit of attention around the detail on how to get there. CFIA website has got some really good tools that are getting better all the time for readability and the ease to understand. Keep it as simple as you can, right? We are going to talk about electronic ways of managing this, about ways of approaching it. Make sure it makes business sense for you, that these are the touch points, that I have an interaction with the product that could be an effect, and it's where I want to know where that product is. It's where I want to trace it through. Start with your business in mind and what makes sense in that business process. It's not the job of one person in your facility. Traceability involves all your team, right? And that's a real key component. Make sure the whole team understands what we're trying to do and how we get there. Encourage you to be a little aware. Look at where some of the recalls are coming. healthycanadians.ca alert recall. Great one to sign up for if you have a strong stomach and you don't mind your email being full because there are more than you can possibly imagine. Traceability is a tool. It's only as good as the commitment you make to it. But it really, again, to me, it lets us stand up and be very proud at the retail store at the interface with the customer that says, you bet this is what we've produced. We've tracked it through. We know it's here. This is the right product. And I think traceability is that opportunity to do that. Thank you very much.